Hello everyone, my name is Rosie Sapphire. If you've been following this devlog series for a while, welcome back. Otherwise, welcome anyway. For context, I have been for the past 2 or so years, on and off, working on a port of the original Five Nights at Freddy's to the Nintendo 64. So far, I'd say it's about 98% complete, with only minor features missing, and some small bugs. Other than that, this is a more or less feature-complete version of Five Nights at Freddy's, with some fun stuff and quality-of-life features added for flavor. Now this is all well and good, but there's a major problem. Nobody can fucking compile it. And it's not really you guys' fault either. There's a lot of steps, a lot of things that can go wrong, a lot of differences with people's computers, and some people just don't have the wherewithal to do all this stuff, even with a tutorial. That's why I'm here today, because I have good news. With the help of a friend from the Nintendo 64 Brew Discord server, Meek, we now have a Dockerization of the build process for FNAF 64, and I'll be explaining step by step everything you need in order to play it. Let's start with some prerequisites. Obviously, you'll need a legally obtained copy of Five Nights at Freddy's, preferably the latest Steam version, 1.132, as that's the only version that I've actually tested with. It might work with older versions, but textures might be swapped around, some assets missing altogether, it might not build at all, or it'll just fucking crash. So make sure, for the best results, you have the newest version of the game, 1.132. Another extremely important step before we even get started is to make sure that you have CPU virtualization enabled in your motherboard's BIOS. This will be called different things on different motherboards, and it'll be found in different places, so you will need to take note of your motherboard's model and look up the steps for that specific motherboard in order to enable CPU virtualization in your BIOS before continuing any further. If you don't do this, you won't be able to use WSL, and the rest of this tutorial will basically be completely pointless. If your motherboard doesn't have this feature, you can always do this on a live install of Debian via a USB drive. And if you don't have that as an option, then I'm sorry, but you're kinda shit out of luck. Best you can hope for is maybe to do it in a virtual machine. However, if you have both of these things ready to go, then we can move on to the next step. For this tutorial, I will be assuming you're using Windows. However, you can follow along on Linux, since we're going to be doing basically the same stuff, and it'll probably be easier since that's what I actually used to develop this port. Anyway, the first thing we're going to need is to set up Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL for short. Admittedly, this is a stupid fucking name because it implies that it's a Windows subsystem for use on a Linux machine instead of the other way around. But I guess marketing is more important than logical naming. Regardless, to set it up, you're going to need to hit the Start button and type Turn Windows Features On or Off, and hit Enter. From this menu, we'll scroll to the bottom and enable the Windows Subsystem for Linux checkbox. Close that and restart your computer. Once you boot it back in, open up the Windows PowerShell in Administrator mode by right-clicking and hit the Run as Admin button. From here, type in WSL-list. This is to make sure that you have no instances of WSL currently installed. If you do have any, then type WSL-unregister and then the name of the instance. Run WSL-list again to make sure that there's nothing there, and then you're good. Once we verified this, type WSL-install Debian with a capital D, and wait for it to install. It'll prompt you to create a username and password at the end, but once you do, it should just pop you right into it, evident by the fact that the text is blue and green now. From here, we're going to type CD and hit Enter to go to what's called the home directory, which is denoted by a tilde for the path. Now type mkdir git to create a directory called git. This is where we're going to be cloning the GitHub repositories into, specifically the FNAF 64 one. In order to get that though, we're going to have to install git. But before we do that, make sure you type sudo apt update -y sudo apt upgrade -y. This will go through and update everything that needs to be updated in your system before we go any further. This is very important because we don't want to be using any out-of-date packages which could cause problems during the build process. Once that's done, run sudo apt install git to install git. When it finishes installing, type cd git to go inside of the git directory we just created earlier, and type git clone --recursive, and then the link to the FNAF 64 GitHub repo, which will be in the description. This will clone the entire repository into our directory. The reason we need the recursive flag is because there are two things called submodules in this repository. One of them is a fork of CTFAK, ClickTeam Fusion Army Knife, which fixes the problems with Wine compatibility, and the other one is the LibDragon source code. Wine is a program that allows you to run Windows executables on Linux. ClickTeam Fusion Army Knife is a program developed by Kostya. What it does is it goes through any video game that was made with the ClickTeam Fusion game engine, and it decompiles it into its original source file and the images and sounds. And then of course LibDragon is the SDK for the Nintendo 64 that I used to make this port with. If you don't have either of those, you're fucked, so make sure you include the recursive flag. Now that we have the repository cloned, we're going to need to move our legally obtained copy of FNAF into it. If you're using Steam, it should be in the directory displayed on screen now. That being C, Program Files 86, Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Five Nights at Freddy's, and then the exe should be right in there. Once you've located it, press Ctrl-N to create a new File Explorer instance. In this new window, you want to go to the left-hand side near the bottom where it says Linux. From here, go to Debian, Home, your username, Git, and FNAF 64. Now just drag your copy of the game from the Steam folder into the FNAF 64 GitHub folder. Make sure that you hold down the Control key while you drag it, because that'll make sure that it copies it instead of just moving it. At this point, it would be a good idea to go to the top, click View, and at the right-hand side where it says File Name Extensions, make sure that box is checked on, and what this will do is it'll allow us to see the file extensions for the files, no shit. From here, verify that the game you just dragged in is Five Nights at Freddy's.exe with that exact naming that you see on screen. If it is any other name, this will not work. It searches specifically for this file. At this point, everything is more or less ready to go, but there is still one very important step that we need to do before we get to building. We're going to be installing Docker. Note that we are installing it inside of the WSL instance and not on our host computer. This is so it's accessible inside WSL when we run the build command. Anyway, go to this link in the description right here and follow the instructions as I am doing them on the screen. Make sure that you only do the install using the apt repository section, as that's what we're going to be using. Copy the commands one by one into the terminal and make sure that each one of them runs individually without any errors. If you see a command like this that has a / at the end of it, make sure you keep selecting the lines until you get down to one that doesn't have it, so you would just select it like this. Copy the command using right-click copy or Ctrl-C, and pasting it into the WSL window by just right-clicking and then hitting enter. Once you finish running this command right here, scroll to the bottom of the instruction page and click on Post Installation Steps for Linux. This will make it so that you're able to run Docker without typing sudo. You may notice how at step 3 it says to log out and log back in. All you need to do is type exit to quit out of the WSL instance back into the PowerShell session. Then just type WSL to re-enter it. Follow the rest of the instructions until you get to the Docker Hello World program. Once you've verified that you can in fact run it without using sudo, we can move on to the penultimate step. At this point, most of the actual hard work is over. All that's left to do is build the fucking ROM. During the previous Docker setup, you will have exited and re-entered the WSL session, which will put you in a different directory. Make sure that you go back to the right place by typing cd:/git/FNAF64. You can even use tab to autocomplete it. The last thing we need to do is type /make-with-docker.sh. And now we wait. This process can take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour depending on how fast your computer is, so be patient. This would be a good time for you to go find something else to do while you wait for it to install. You'll know when it's done when you see a couple of lines at the bottom that says FNAF.z64 on them. From this point, type ls to see what's inside of your current directory, and you should see a file named FNAF.z64. Congratulations! You've built your own copy of Five Nights at Freddy's 64, and now you're finally ready to play it. Oh yeah, about that. Now, unfortunately, as I have mentioned in previous devlogs, this game will not run on just any old emulator. N64 games made with LibDragon can only be run on cycle-accurate Nintendo 64 emulators, which means that they emulate the actual hardware down to a T. Now, hopefully this will change in the future, and the team is still avidly working on that, but for the time being, the only two emulators that are known to actually work with LibDragon built games are Ares and Simple 64. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to be using Ares, since I think this is the one that most people use, and I also use it for testing. One thing to note is that both Ares and Simple 64 use a plugin called Parallel RSP. What this does is it emulates the Nintendo 64's reality signal processor using Vulkan. If you have an older graphics card that doesn't support Vulkan, this will not work, and you will have no choice but to run the game on real hardware if you want to play it at all. And we'll get to that in the next section. But anyway, go to this link in the description and hit the download button. Once you've got it on your computer, extract it to wherever is most convenient for you. Desktop, documents, wherever the hell you want, just as long as you remember where it is. Now once it's extracted, go back to the folder containing your copy of FNAF.z64 and drag it on top of the Ares.exe file. Finally, at long last, you are able to play Five Nights at Freddy's 64 on an emulator. Keep in mind, if this is your first time using the emulator, you will need to configure your controls to be most comfortable for you, so that's how you get it working on emulator, but I know what some of you are really here for. Alright, time for the coup de grace. Playing the game on an actual Nintendo 64 console. In order to do this, you're going to need to have a flash cart for the N64. This comes in the form of either an EverDrive, Summer Cart, 64 drive, etc. Just as long as it has a USB connector on the side of the cartridge. Now, there is an older version of the EverDrive I used to have, which only took microSD, and in that case, you would just copy the ROM over to the drive that way, but if you have anything that takes microUSB as an input, here's what you do. Go to Boo342's UNF Loader GitHub releases page, link in the description of course, and download the Windows variant of the latest version. As of the time of making this video, it is version 2.2. Download it and extract it to a location of your choice. Make sure at this point that your Nintendo 64 is turned on and the cable is plugged into the side of the cartridge. Open up your folder containing your built FNAF 64 ROM and drag it on top of unfloader.exe. This should open a terminal window with a green progress bar filling up. At this point, the ROM is being uploaded to your cartridge. And once it's done, there you go. Five Nights at Freddy's on the fucking N64. There are a few common errors that you can get with UNF Loader. One of them is that it didn't find a flash cart. If you know for a fact that your USB cable is plugged in, try plugging it into a different port on the back of your computer. And if that doesn't work, you can always try a different cable. And if none of that works, you show this computer who's fucking boss. Another common error is that it doesn't have the permissions and it's asking if you're running as sudo. Usually this happens if you try to upload it and then it fails halfway through and then you try to upload again. All you need to do is hit the reset button on the console and you should be good to go. With all that being said, I really hope this tutorial actually helps you guys get to play this game finally, because it disheartened me so fucking much the amount of people who weren't able to play it due to a myriad of problems. The whole point of Docker is to fix the whole issue of works on my computer by making it basically work on anybody's computer given the right initial setup. I know damn well that there's a good chance that there will still be some problems people have with this whole thing, and if you do, leave them in the comments. If there's enough people who have problems that I either A, can't answer in the comments, or B, am noticing a pattern with, I'll make a small follow-up video addressing the most common issues people are having with this method. For those this video has helped, however, I really hope you enjoyed this port. I busted my ass on it. Now keep in mind, this is all written in C, and you have all the source code right there at your fingertips. So in addition to just enjoying the game, you can also make whatever fuck off mods you want and share them with your friends. Go ape shit! Honestly, I want to see what unhinged bullshit you guys can create. It might be a good time to mention that I have a Discord server, and I'll link it in the description, in which there is a programming channel for you guys to submit whatever code or mods you make for this, or just programming stuff in general. So feel free to check it out if you want to. You can also fork the repository using GitHub and then make whatever modifications you want to it there. The original owner of the repository, I think, always gets notified when someone makes a fork, so I will definitely be checking that shit out if you guys do it. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you when I'm looking at ya.
Hey!